Once we've added all of the data that we want to, it's of course important to be able to use or access that data. Whether as a researcher or part of a collaborative work, we need to be able to see the data. There's a couple of ways to do that. You see here, we're looking at that graphical representation for the technical examination of irises, which is shown here in that dark blue node. And you can see that there's starting to be a number of connections to that, which might get a little confusing. So there's a couple ways that you can approach this. If this makes sense to you and you want to just find the digital resource and click on it and explore it, you could absolutely do that, perhaps helped by the legend, which again is shown here on the right. So you could know that you're looking for data files. That's probably a digital resource. You could go find the digital resource, et cetera, et cetera. If this is a little too visually messy to really see that, or especially as projects get more complex, there's this handy search function, which lets you search the visual network that's being shown here, which again, just as a reminder, this was pulled up when I searched for the specific technical examination that I want to explore the data from. So here you can see that I can immediately search on something that I'm looking for. So let's say I want to use the XRF data that I know has been collected from this. I can simply start to type XRF and something pops up that has a very compelling name, Area 1 XRF. That's probably what I'm looking for, and it's a digital resource. If I click on that, you can see that this pops into the information view, which shows me, for example, that this is related to the observation or experiment done on irises using the Brooker Artax X-ray fluorescence spectrometer. So I'm pretty confident that this is the data I want to look at or indeed to edit. And so that's the button that I'm going to click here, is this information that allows me to edit this. When I click that, you see that I pop over into the actual resource model. So this is one of those resources that we started the demonstration with, showing you all of the detailed information that you can add. So rather than working through a workflow, if I wanted to add information here, I could. I could also just observe, see what data has been entered. So for example, see the name. As the term edit implies, I could also change that if I needed to. In this case, we're wanting to just explore the data. So I'm going to pop down to the bottom of this list where you see files of digital resource and an arrow that could expand them. So I'm going to click on that. And one of the first things you see is that, again, if we wanted to add data to this digital resource, to add to the XRF data set from Area 1, we could select files or drag and drop additional files here, and it would work just like as the workflow. If instead we just want to use the data, we can select one of the files that has already been uploaded. So you can see them both here. If I click on one, you see that we get that same X-ray fluorescence data viewer that's dynamic, that lets me read the information. We also now have tools available to us up here in the upper right. You can see I could download this if I needed an image of it. I can zoom, I can pan, we can auto scale the data. You can see that there's some information that we can use to start to explore the data. However, I noticed, of course, that there were two files here, and I told you at the beginning of this that this system would allow you to compare data. So how does that work? Well, over here on the right, we have this data tab. And if I click on it, you can see that the system knows that there's a second spectrum associated with this data set. So I can select that and add the series to the chart. And what you see here now is two spectra that I can look at and visually compare. And this is, of course, where these tools may become particularly important, where, say, zooming in on this section of the plot may help me compare and understand the differences between these two particular sets of data. If I wanted to understand more about any of them, of course, their individual metadata is accessible underneath the file. One of the other things that's really compelling about this to me is it also makes it much easier to share this information. So you see here at the top, there's a specific URL associated with this page, this part of the Arches for Science system where this data has been uploaded. So if I wanted to, I could simply copy out that URL, email it to a colleague who has access to the Arches instance that we're using, and have them take a look at the data. Now, why might you do that? Well, maybe you're interpreting this data together. So for example, somebody else might look at this data, come into this statement and see that there's been an interpretation here. Maybe they want to, say, edit that and say, well, I actually also see trace, I don't know, let's say aluminum in this spectrum. So they could edit that interpretation and save the edit. So this allows groups to work together on data in real time on this sort of instance that is holding and allowing for the data to be observed, used, compared, and shared.